Hello, Xeno fans. It's the Space King Scott here. And today is not the anniversary of Xenoblade 3. It's the day after the anniversary of Xenoblade 3. But, well, I did a live stream yesterday, so I think things are gonna balance out for the most part. I think it's okay. Uh, Today I just kind of wanted to talk about, well, looking back on 3 years of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, you know? This is going to be completely unscripted, and it's going to be basically just a series of thoughts that I allow to escape as I just look around the wiki and I talk about all sorts of stuff. So, just strap on in, get a snack or something, put me on the background. It's not going to be a in-depth serious video like I usually make. So, yeah. So, first and foremost, it's been 3 years since Xenoblade 3 came out, and it took me about 3 weeks to finish the game when I played it. And what's interesting to me is that I think I've seen, as time has gone on, a paradigm shift. Um, when Xenoblade 3 was fresh and in everyone's mind within the community, what was a very common consensus was that the storyline of Xenoblade 3 was, well, if not the weakest, arguably just outright bad in many respects. Because the team kept a lot of their most secret, most questionable cards close to the chest. But we now exist in a world that is post Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed, post Xenoblade 3 Ionios moments, and now post Xenoblade X Chapter 13. All of which has helped to retroactively shape the vision of the story of Xenoblade 3 and allowed it to come more so into focus and understand what it was that Tetsuya Takahashi and his team were even actually originally attempting. The central thesis of Xenoblade 3's story was that of effectively self-criticism. It basically deconstructed the narratives of both Xenoblade 1 and Xenoblade 2 insofar as literally having the protagonists of the first two games show up and sacrifice themselves at the very end. Because, well, Xenoblade was a franchise that was accustomed to pulling its punches. It always backed down. It backed down on Fiora's death. It backed down on Numa's sacrifice. This game does not back down. This story ends with Noah and Mio and the crew being separated for an undeterminate amount of time. Ionios' entire existence effectively being erased, although the memories of its existence do linger on the wind. We are led to believe that all of the heroes of 1 and 2, with the exception of Melia and Nia, are gone. These are very hard to swallow pills. Especially if you're an individual who, going into the Xenoblade 3 game, was expecting a crossover fan service extravaganza along the lines of something akin to, well, I guess I should just say Marvel, because that's what the community that enjoyed 3 compared that idea to. We didn't get that kind of gigantic Avengers Assemble moment. And I think the fact that it didn't left a negative taste in a lot of people's mouths. I, however, wasn't one of those people. I wanted Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to be able to stand on its own two feet as its own story, without needing to rely so heavily onto 1 and 2 so as to demean or degrade the narrative integrity of 3 itself. 3's central thesis is deconstruction, once again. All of these elements that we thought that we understood are abstracted. They're fed through a lens that basically makes them murky. I mean, we had to basically be told by Takahashi himself, because it wasn't obvious, although some would say it was obvious, that Malos's core existed within the Sword of the End. End Sword of the End, to be precise. But you weren't one to know that if you weren't looking for it. Many people seemingly let it go over their heads. And that's just one of many examples. These things that we had grown accustomed to weren't there. And things that were there, they were smudged a bit, different. And for a person like me, who wanted a unique experience, I got what I wanted. But a lot of people didn't. And that's just kind of a fact that swims around this game. To this day, we're led to believe that Xenoblade 2 has the best sales in the franchise, and that 3 lags behind. Now, there are many factors for that, but fans of 2 will tell you it's because it's just a better game than 3. But I don't think that's necessarily a fair thing to say when 3 wasn't trying to be like 2 in the first place. 2 has very principled, very structured, archetypal villains that are, how do you want to say, self-critical? No, I wouldn't say that. More so, hold themselves to a strict kind of code or series of beliefs. There's only one antagonist in 3 that does that, and that's N. Most of the other antagonists in 3 are goofy, effectively Power Rangers villains. And if you can't get behind that, well, the story's not going to be for you. And if the story's not for you, well, the game's probably not for you, to be perfectly honest. But why is it that it resonated with me beyond wanting it to be its own thing? Well, it's because in 2022, when this game came out, I was in a deeply transitional portion of my life. College was being completed. I was transitioning into looking for a job. I was gaining more and more responsibilities. And because of that, I related with the protagonists of this story, who were questioning everything. You know, life was simple until it wasn't. Just like for them. They woke up, they fought the Agnians. That was their day-to-day. That was their raison d'etre. But suddenly, they were hit with a surprise. And that surprise pushed them to consider something different. That's largely the position my life was in. So, I ended up connecting with this story on a deeply personal level because I saw myself in these characters. And I think that that's the one prevailing praise of Xenoblade 3 that has stuck around since the game has came out, which is that this core cast, Noah, Mio, Uni, Lance, Tyon, and Senna, they are, in my view, the most fully realized characters in the Xenoblade franchise. Early on, it looked like Taion had taken a lead, but then it becomes clear that this is Noah's adventure, and an adventure it is indeed. I don't think I need to go into major detail about things like Chapter 5, but, well, the Eclipse still handily sits at the top as being amongst the strongest sequence of writing and drama that this series has ever had. I think that even people who walked away not necessarily liking 3 still have to admit that, well, 3 had one hell of a mid-game. It was the best mid-game climax in the series. Better than Makana's Core, and better than landing in Moritha. Maybe that's controversial, but I don't necessarily think that it is. People then go on to say that they peaked too early. That by basically funneling everything that they had into creating this one spectacular, grand, epic climax, that they had run out of steam by the end. But I also have never really agreed with this criticism because, well, I just thought that Chapter 7 was awesome for the most part. We get as close as we're going to get to that gigantic fan service that you wanted, that a lot of people wanted. For God's sakes, we have Melia and Nia joining you on the battlefield to take down Z, and Melia literally says it's all is for the future connected, which left me with the biggest grin on my face the first time I experienced it. Yes, I cried and I was emotional at Chapter 5, but I felt a massive wave and sense of excitement at what the finale had delivered. I think that some people had a negative experience with the final battle because it is indeed a very difficult and very long fight without checkpoints. And if you had a rough experience in that fight and you had to restart multiple times, well, then what happens? Suddenly these big epic set pieces that are supposed to be a grand finale just kind of turn into a ball and chain. That's why it is that I think that a lot of people who played this game a second time got more out of it. Xenoblade 3 is, like every single narrative in the Xenoblade series, heavily centered around foreshadowing. There are a lot of elements that show up early on that you have no idea what they're talking about or what they're alluding to, but by the time that you're deeply far in, suddenly the cards are on the table, and you can see how these things connect. They come together in a much better fashion on the second go-around than they do on the first go-around, especially when you have the knowledge of Ionios moments, Future Redeemed, and now X to back that up. Now then, I think I've spent enough time talking about the plot. All in all, I feel largely the same as I did back in the day. I still think that this is a pretty strong plot. It accomplished most of what it set out to do. It wanted to tell a story about life, about the struggle of humanity, about death, about very serious topics, and it wanted to handle them seriously. This is not a funny game like Xenoblade 2 could be. And also, this is not a larger-than-life grandiose adventure in the same fashion as 1. This is a grounded human tale. And I think that it surpassed my expectations at the time, and it delivered on what it was trying to achieve. That takes us to, well, Future Redeemed and all of the extra material that has gone into illuminating our experience and questions that have basically reframed how we've thought about this game. I think that it's a very fair statement to say that Future Redeemed is perhaps the most essential DLC in the series. Xenoblade 1 can largely exist without Future Connected. Xenoblade 2 can exist without Torna, although you don't really want it to if you want a full scope on how Mithra and Jin's characters are. However, Xenoblade 3 was written very clearly with Future Redeemed and its DLC in mind as a very mission-critical component of the puzzle. And how you feel about that will heavily influence how you feel about the whole package of Xenoblade 3. Is it okay for a DLC to pick up as much as what 3 left on the table? Well, I guess it just depends largely on what the person in question wanted. I went into Future Redeemed thinking that I wasn't going to like it. I know that sounds crazy coming from me, but I thought I saw this Matthew character, and they talked about a new protagonist with a new adventure. And what I thought was going to happen is that I thought that Shulk and Rex were going to get sidelined in favor of a cast of characters that I wouldn't have enough time to connect with, and I wouldn't end up enjoying. Now, I kind of was in that right when it pertained to the characters of Nickel and Glimmer, but Matthew and A got a tremendous amount of mileage out of what little time they had. That's to say nothing of what they managed to pull off with Shulk and Rex. Shulk and Rex are proper evolutions of the characters that we saw them as in the prior game, thus allowing for a tasteful degree of fan service that our stupid Avengers crossover wouldn't have given us. And Takahashi manages to make the story culminate in one of the most jaw-dropping moments in the entire series, if not the most jaw-dropping. The truth of Xenoblade's world and how it may or may not be connected to the other titles in the franchise. Not only did Xenoblade 3 prove that it actually was a mission-critical piece of the overall storyline, it was the most important piece. It was the part at which all of this came together in a grand chorus. And I can't get over how I felt when I finished 3 the first time. I went to bed, and when I woke up the next morning, I felt as though I wanted my life to continue. As a person that has spent a large portion of their life battling depression, battling the demons in my mind that so heavily wish for me to fail, that sensation, that gratitude, it was transcendent. If I'm ever having a bad day, I can look at how the finales of 3 or Future Redeemed made me feel. And they never cease to put a smile on my face. Hello. Again, just got interrupted and had to pause the recording. A professional person would restart the recording entirely, but I am not professional. Where was I? Oh yeah, I do believe I was talking about the emotional impact that the ending of these games had on me. Really, I think I covered most everything I really wanted to, so yeah, not really much more to talk about there. Let's talk about the combat of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. You know, the main gameplay besides exploring the open world. Uh, I feel like this is one of those elements that you either love this or you just are very mixed on it. Personally, I found it very complicated, but once I got a handle on it, I found it to be a lot of fun. The just general flow of gameplay is improved so dramatically by the ability to switch to your alternate characters mid-battle. Now, this is a feature that you see in stuff like the Final Fantasy VII Remake project, but I really wanted it in a Xenoblade game because it just made the most sense to include. And I got my wish. I also, well, also got something I didn't really like, which was how important the healer class is in this game. If your healer goes down, it's just over. Unless you have a special item equipped. And, you know, that can certainly dampen the experience. So, what I find is the most, how do I say this, satisfying thing to do is to simply just switch to the healer and play as them in order to make sure that I don't die. That's not to say that the AI in this game is bad. It's actually fairly decent, at least compared to, well, one in particular. Another thing is that, well, I feel like there are a lot of people that just didn't understand core gameplay mechanics. Like, there's a lot of people out there that played the chain attacks and didn't realize that they could choose the character that they were going to attack with. And I guess that's a failure of the game's tutorialization. Ouroboros is a very fascinating mechanic in that it temporarily makes you invincible. In most other RPGs, this would be a major no-no, but, well, considering that it's a last resort healing option in the case of Uni, and it's also a gigantic FU attack in the case of interlinks during chain attacks, it ends up being an example of a power that feels decently balanced for the most part. You have to build up to the longer lasting variant, and by the time you get to a build up that long, you've already done a sizable amount of work in the core fight itself. That's to say nothing of one of my favorite mechanics in this game, which is the fusion art system. How you can fuse together diamond and circle arts to create stronger effects. I love this idea, to be honest. It adds a very strategic element to the gameplay experience that's just not there in the other games. Mixing and matching arts together based on what combination would create the most devastating result was a tremendous amount of fun, especially when it came to the topic of building sets. Now, you know, a lot of people just watched the videos that Anel put out of what builds were the best, but his builds, while good, were not the best builds that you could make. You could certainly make better builds, and, well, Once you understand how this game's systems work, it's fantastic, honestly. Coming up with something devastating, coming up with a freaking hate crime of a freaking attack is just, it's euphoric. Another element that I really liked in the combat mechanics was the implementation of the, what was it? What was the name of the class? I'm trying to remember. It's the class where you... It's Soul Hacker. The class that gets stronger as you learn talent arts from unique monsters. I felt that a Blue Mage was a obvious addition to the series that hadn't been done before, and the class system made that an obvious addition. And I guess that's a seamless talk going into classes. Classes in this game are awesome. It's an awesome system, truly. I don't know what to say about it that hasn't already been said. It's just the customization of a job system that marries perfectly with the secondary content, because the hero system effectively just gives you a reason that didn't exist in prior games to engage with the secondary content. And by engaging with that secondary content, by engaging with that secondary content, you're rewarded in a dramatic way. In a very, very positive fashion. And I think that they did a great job of making you want to engage with the core mechanics. Next up, we're going to talk about the world. Ionios. Ionios has been heavily criticized because it's not as breathtaking or as unique as All Rest or as Bionis and Mechonis. And I'm inclined to agree somewhat. I think that by reusing the settings of Xenoblade 1 and 2, you inevitably run into a problem whereby the player has effectively already seen many of these elements before, and the only way you can get something truly unique is by remixing areas in ways that were unconventional, such as the Mactha Wildwood. That having been said, the core level design itself is actually fairly strong in my opinion, and this can largely be seen as being down to the fact that the map designer in this game had previously worked on Bloodborne. It's a very little known fact, and it shows. The game is interconnected and set up in a fashion that feels like it makes sense in a sort of chaotic way. It's basically a gigantic circle. And, well, I had fun exploring it. I mean, Upper Atia is underdeveloped, and the sea, the Great Sea, is definitely hit or miss depending on how you feel about the controls. My take is that the controls could have been better, but for what it's worth, it's okay. The areas of a Xenoblade game are just very important, and I think that going into Xenoblade Chronicles 4, we're gonna see something that we haven't seen before. We're gonna see something fresh, something new. Something we couldn't have thought of seeing before. I already talked about the characters. I don't need to talk about them again. Let's talk about the music. Music of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is, well, I don't think it's contentious. It's just that it's different. Like a lot of Xenoblade 3. It's different in that it's atmospheric, it's vibe setting, it's moody, and it's downtrodden in a way that the majority of Xeno games simply are not. They go for a loud, bombastic feeling, setting off on a grand adventure. Xenoblade 3 just isn't like that. And the music wouldn't fit that vibe. So, they changed things. They changed things like they changed a lot of things. And your mileage will vary. And this is largely because of this game's problem with overriding the music. The menu overrides the area themes. Meaning that, if you open up the menu every few minutes, you cut off the music before it can properly crescendo. Skip traveling also overrides the music. Going into battle overrides the music. Activating chain attack overrides battle music. This game has a very big problem when it comes to music. I think that the music in Xenoblade 3 is beautiful. It has a Metroid Prime quality about it where it threads that thin line between being music that is atmospheric and vibe setting, but also artistically brilliant in its own right and memorable. It's just that you wouldn't know that because the systems are set up in a fashion that prevent you from experiencing it. That's why it is we're listening to it right now. It's because I'm willing to bet a sizable portion of the people who played Xenoblade 3 have never heard a lot of its soundtrack all the way through for a lot of songs. Or if you did, you only heard it once or twice. Once or twice is not enough time for a song to set in. At least in a video game sense. This is probably my biggest criticism with the game. Because, well, the community largely came to a consensus that this needed to be fixed, raised hell online, and Monolith Soft simply didn't respond. We know that there has to be some sort of protocol in the game to not override music, because during the final battle of Future Redeemed, activating a chain attack does not override Redeem the Future. Isn't that interesting? Well, for whatever reason, I guess we're stuck waiting until Xenoblade 3 Definitive Edition in fucking 2032. See you then. Jeez. Another thing I have to call attention to is the fact that they created their own flutes for the purpose of this game to then record the music with. Yasunori Mitsuda and his team working on this game's music poured their soul into every level of the composition. I mean, these flutes are probably going to be as important to the history of the Xeno franchise, just like the original diorama that made up the Bionis and Mechonis' original concept. Most likely will be held in that kind of legendary status of a thing that the fans will never get to have. And that's kind of a shame, but also it makes sense. These are priceless. They belong in the Nintendo Museum or something along those lines, or Monolith Soft HQ, and they're never going anywhere. I guess next up we can talk about, Let's talk about that special edition. Yeah, the special edition. The special edition situation for this game was cursed. I remember waiting for 11 hours for my chance to get this game bought. Oh boy. Can't even find it. People don't wanna. People don't wanna. They don't wanna archive this on the wiki, and I can't blame them because that image of Wario is burnt into all of our collective minds forever. Oh God. Oh. Oh, there's something to talk about. The damn radio. This damn radio has occupied too much of my headspace. I need to get it out of there somehow. That's all I really have to say about that. Next up, let's talk about Ionios moments. I got this from this scan from the Internet Archive. I think that after Future Redeemed, a lot of the narrative on the Xenoblade 3 experience had shifted insofar as people had lightened up on their opinions on the game. And I don't know, I think that things shifted a little bit further with Ionios moments. There were some people that are like, that doesn't make sense, or that's stupid, or I don't care about Xenoblade 4, etc., etc. But by and large, I think that this had satiated a decent amount of curiosity pertaining to the story of Xenoblade 3, insofar as giving some hard confirmations to some things that weren't entirely clear, or maybe got lost in translation. For example, the Sword of the End or the Fists of the End are said the same in Japanese. It's just, you wouldn't know that because Ken means sword or fist. Ken of the End. It's the same word. It's the same thing. Yeah, stuff like that. Stuff that gets lost in translation. It's been 3 years. A lot of assumed things, misunderstood, have been clarified by experts in the community. And that's kind of a good thing, because, well, if we allow misinformation to spread, the community is liable to turn into a hellhole. And we don't want that. Don't want to turn into the Sonic or Star Wars communities. Trying to think of something to say to wrap this all up. I guess I'll just talk about whether or not this game is still my favorite game of all time. Because it did dethrone Xenoblade 1 to reach that. But it took the entire whole of the Xenoblade 3 experience to do so. And by that I mean I needed everything together in order to accept that I liked this more than Xenoblade 1. I want to emphasize something. I like all Xeno games except Saga 2. Saga 2 sucks. And it was hard initially to admit that I liked 3 more than 1, because I was surrounded by a lot of negativity back then. A lot of people just didn't understand why you would ever say 3 is your favorite. But I think that 3's come into its own since then, and we've been able to accept what is and what was. We judge the game for what's there, and we're not tearing into it for what it's not. And for that reason, it's easier to accept than it was initially. That's all I really have to say about that. There were bitter pills to swallow in this package, but by the end, I was happy. Happy in a way that I rarely am. And I'll cherish those memories forever. And I am relentlessly, hopelessly excited for the next chapter of the saga. It's been 3 years, and I'm still willing to go to bat for this game. It means a lot to me. That's all I really have to say. So, I've been the Space King Scott. This was completely unscripted. I'll see you in the next one. See you for that XCX retrospective. Whenever Halcyonium gets off his ass and uploads the cutscenes. No hate to Halcyonium, his job is hell. See you guys next time.